The background to this talk is me and David were actually in a conference in Taipei. About 4 days ago, I got a phone call from the conference organizer saying, Adrian, you need to do an extra talk. You can talk about anything you want, but it has to be fairly controversial to keep the audience entertained and hopefully teach them something. I don't actually care what it is, so off you go. This is the culmination of the work. So I entitled it Social Media in the Intensive Care Unit, Swiping Left or Right and Start Learning. And I hope the title becomes clear as we go along to my talk. So these are my declaration of interests. These are the organizations I work for. I'm grossly underpaid, I think, by most of them. But the most important thing is my declaration of my cognitive bias. So I do work for the Bottom Line website. Some of you may have heard about it. I do work for the ESICM, Fluid Academy, and the Spacer Group, where I write and summarize educational blogs. They're free and open access. So to download the blogs, they're free. To access the videos, they are free. So my promotional to these websites is, if you fancy having a look, they're there for you. I'm going to start this story by thinking about medical education and how people used to learn and how I think people should be learning, if that makes sense. This is a picture taken from St. Thomas's Hospital. This is the hospital where I work. Obviously, this is not the time when I was a medical student, but you will recognize the nurses, you will recognize the doctors, and you will recognize the patients around them. Different people see this different ways. So some people think this is a very paternalistic model where the doctors and nurses are standing around the patient. Equally, some people argue, well, it's very patient-centered because they're all focusing around the patient. Think of it what you will. But in those days, articles such as this came up. So this is published in the Journal of America, in the journal called JAMA, and it's entitled How to Keep Up with the Medical Literature. And this is the famous quote from it. All that is required is the current issue of the journal, an easy chair, pencils, a pad of paper, postal cards, along with a genuine, sustaining interest in all fields of medicine to keep up to date. That was the advice 50, 60 years ago. I would argue that's impossible to do now with that model in mind. Absolutely impossible. When I was a medical student, this is what we used on our ward round. Colloquially in Britain, we call it the cheese and onion and salt and vinegar, because the colors of the clinical medicine handbook and the clinical surgical handbook were reflective of the Walker's packet of crisps. So cheese and onion, salt and vinegar. And that's how you learned. You went around, you did a ward round, you carried it in your white coats, in your pocket, it weighed it down. And if you didn't know something, you flipped through it, and there was your answer. Things have obviously changed. Hands up those of you who have a mobile phone. Hands up those of you who have a smartphone, i.e. a mobile phone that allows you to access the internet. One or two of you haven't put their hands up, so I'm going to assume you've got a Nokia 3210. But my point is this, that when you don't know something on your ward round, when you're reading a journal or whatever it is, you no longer go to a library. You may not even have a library in your institution. You go on the internet, Google something, or whatever your intranet search engine is. That's how you look up information. That's how you fill that knowledge gap. So it's clearly changed. I like this quote. There is something called free and open access to medical education. Hands up those of you who've heard about it. And the idea is very, very simple. The idea is that medical education should be free. Access to information should be free. And you've heard some wonderful work by colleagues in lower middle income countries, how they're trying to spread medical education. And this is a quote, but I'll concentrate on the last two lines. If you want to know how we practice medicine now, go to a good conference, such as this one. If you want to know how we will practice medicine in the future, listen in the hallways, use phone. And I believe that. I genuinely believe that works. In our personal lives, on your smartphones, which allows you to connect to the internet, I would wager a good amount of money that you have got several of these applications on it. Hands up those of you who have not got any of this on their smartphones. Excellent, I'm right. Okay? So, all of you are already connected to social media. You might not have used it for your professional side of your existence, but certainly your personal side. We've already heard from Abby how technology has changed our life from a personal perspective, but in healthcare, that hasn't changed. And I think the story is similar for medical education as well, but I do think it's probably ahead of the whole system that Abby talks about. These are some fascinating numbers. And this is a chart that shows the number of years it took for each product to reach 50 million users. So if you think about something that we take for granted every day, so call it debit card, say, it took 12 years for the debit card as an entity to reach 50 million users. The internet, which we are now, all of us in this room are connected to, it took 7 years. But look at the bottom row. Facebook, Twitter, 3 and 2 years. It took 2 years to reach 50 million users. So why social media in medical education? Broadly speaking, we use it to learn, we use it to engage, we use it to share, and there's something called branding, which is probably what I think the least important. So learn, engage, and share, and let's go through each one. Learn. It is already, as I said, impossible to keep up with the amount of medical information out there. There's just far too much. There's only so much working harder will take you, so you're going to need to work smarter. There are ways and means to help you aggregate all the information out there to pick out the ones that will be relevant to your practice. It may be in the form of a website that highlights information that's relevant to your practice. For example, if you are interested in trauma, you can go to this website. If you're interested in echocardiography, like I am, there are a couple of websites and newsletters that I subscribe to. They aggregate all the available information for you. Because we are all connected through the internet now, you are no longer restricted by geography or indeed time. When I was doing my BSc project, I remember having to trying to obtain a reference from the East African Journal of Medicine. In order to get a copy of the East African Journal of Medicine, you had to go to a library, you had to fill a card, and if you're lucky, within a week, a post would arrive in your library for you to pick up. I thought it was such a monumental exercise. Till this day, the pinnacle of my research publishing career will be if I get a lecture in the East African Journal of Medicine. That will be it. That will be my career done and completed. We don't have to do that anymore. If you want a copy of a journal, it gets sent to you electronically there and then. You might have to pay for it, for which I disagree with, but you get it there and then. It also doesn't have to be in a printed form anymore. There are video recordings, there are images, there are pictures, there are audio recordings, such as in this conference, they will upload some of the videos later on. But my point is, when you're learning, for example, such as a technical skill, such as echocardiography, when you're learning to ultrasound the heart, it really, really helps to watch a video. Putting in a central line, say, the correct way of putting in a central line, tips and tricks. It's much easier to learn those skills if you're watching something as opposed to reading. Step 1, do this. Step 2, do this. Step 3, do this. But the great thing, the really important thing that sets social media apart is real-time interaction. We are connected. It means that you can ask questions to someone on the other side of the world there and then. I'll give you an example. I run my unit's journal club, and the other morning we were discussing the LEOPARD trial on levosimendan in use in critical care. And one of the colleagues said, "Why? I don't understand it. I don't think it's a very good trial. I think that's because they haven't done X." And that particular question was around echocardiography. I said, well, that's a very, very fair question. You know what? I'm going to contact the first author now. So on my mobile phone, I sent the first author a message saying, we're at a journal club. We've asked a question. Can you answer it? Thinking that he would see it in his busy day and ping me back an answer, and I'll tell the group. About 2 minutes later, the first author pinged back and said, can I ring you now? Okay. And so that journal club was joined by the first author of an international paper on speakerphone, this being, well, questioned by my group of colleagues there and then. With technology, you can do that. The learning opportunities that it confers is astounding. Why not take advantage of it? I'm a bit of a Trekkie as well, so I'm glad Victoria put this up. So that example just highlights the importance of interaction. Not just interaction with speakers and eminent experts in their particular field, but with each other. You only learn so much, I think, when you read a journal by yourself. I think true learning and improvements in patient care happens when you discuss the paper as a group, as a team. What do you think about this? What do you think about this? Well, I think this is this. I think this is this. Do you think we should put it into our practice in our team, on our unit? Well, maybe, possibly, so on and so forth. It is that exchange of ideas that is where the learning genuinely takes place. Share? All of us have got guidelines, protocols, standard operating procedures, etc. Perhaps you are trying to develop a guideline on traumatic brain injury, say as an example. There are lots of resources out there, and these are just some of them. Most of them are free, and they share in the spirit of the FOAM movement that I've talked about. But it means that you can download guidelines, standard operating procedures from institutions such as Professor Mannon's institution in Cambridge. These are a couple of examples of checklists and protocols in a unit I've worked in and developed. So a rapid sequence checklist, you can see there, tracheostomy care sitting there. Why reinvent the wheel? If it's there, I'm not saying use it exactly as it is. You might want to adapt it to your own resources, settings, etc. When you learn, the next challenge is to teach the next generation. I think teaching and educating is part and parcel of being a healthcare professional. And the best way to learn is to teach. And most people, through their journey, through social media, using all these online resources, will hit a curve somewhere. You will start off with just taking it all in. You go to the websites, you have a Twitter feed, and just read. You find something interesting, and you say, right, that's really interesting, I'm going to save it for myself. But slowly, as you get more comfortable with the platform, you might say, well, that's a really, really interesting article I've picked up from a website, from a Twitter feed, I'm going to share it. Send it out to the rest of the group. You might then decide to take it that one step further, saying, well, it's a lot of paper, I'm going to be doing a journal club review on it anyway. I'm going to share my presentation of the journal club with my colleagues, with the rest of the world, so on and so forth. So it moves from a one-way relationship to a two-way relationship. And instead of taking value, you add value to it because you've critiqued the paper, so on and so forth. You fine-tune the checklist that you've initially took. For those of you who are thinking about developing content, these are sort of tips I would highlight. There are lots and lots of websites, like I've already showed you. So you need to ask yourself, what makes my website special? How does this add value to what's already there? So what's missing? The gap analysis. You need to be able to bring all those information together and curate them and design it in such a way, present it in such a way that it's easy to digest, easy to learn, retain. Do you want to build in some form of interactive function in your platform. So for example, would you want to interact on Facebook, Twitter, on your website, so on and so forth? I talked about branding, and I'll tie that in with a case illustration of the bottom line when it comes to sustainability. The bottom line is a website where every week we review an article, it's a journal club style, and we present the bottom line. It started off as a plaything for 3 of us. It's been going on for about 2.5 years now. And you think, well, once a week, 3 people, easy peasy. It isn't. It's taken a lot of time. We have a team now of 7 internationally. Initially, we all live 15 miles from each other. So now we've got colleagues in Australia who do the reviews for us as well. We've all got busy jobs, we've all got busy lives, so it might be more time consuming than you think. To be fair, you've heard benefits, but there are risks as well. Anyone can publish anything. Anyone can go on a web page, design their own website, and say whatever they want. They can go up and say, tidal volume at 10 mils per kilo is better than 6 mils per kilo. They can. So when you tweet something, does it make it credible? And I think your own professional judgment needs to come into it again. In the same way as you would read a manuscript printed and go, do I believe that this is robust evidence? Do I believe that it's robust enough to change my practice? You need to think about the same quality indicators, checklists in your head for online resources. Because having an opinion on something doesn't make you an expert. We all have opinions on X, Y, and Z. What I think fascinating about social media is that obviously we use it for medical education, healthcare, so on and so forth. But actually, most of it is done, the majority of social media is for personal use, celebrities, so on and so forth. So bear that in mind. Is something you see and read online credible enough for you to change your practice? How many of you recognize this equation? Hands up those of you who recognize it. I expect Victoria to. This is the equation you use to calculate an impact factor of a journal. So all of you are familiar with the concept of impact factor on a journal. So for example, in the New England Journal is 50 plus. The Intensive Care Medicine, which is a journal of the ESICM, is an impact factor of 17, I think. And what it is the number of times a article, manuscript has been cited over the last 2 years over the total number of articles published in that journal over the last 2 years. Now, at face value, you might think that's great. It means that lots and lots of people are reading articles and citing articles from that particular journal. But the cynic in me will say you can game this very, very easily. Because there's a numerator, there's a denominator. You can manipulate those numbers, especially the denominator bit, and say, I've got a high impact factor. But it doesn't translate to people genuinely learning. It certainly doesn't translate to people improving patient care. Social media has also got an example. This is basically something called the simpler analytics. All I want you to know is that this simpler analytics was taken in a meeting called the International Fluid Academy back in 2017. And you can see lots of different numbers. What do the numbers mean? Do the highest number mean better learning? We hope. More interaction? Probably. Improved patient care? Altmetrics? Those of you who've heard of this, hands up. This is how it's calculated. So it's an online a way of aggregating or modifying the impact factor to take into account online use. That's all it is. There's obviously a danger. You're all connected. You all look at Facebook every day, Twitter every day. Well, you all, me, I look at Facebook every day. I'm getting better. Rehab helps. So what? So what do we do now with all this? Ultimately, we want to improve, we want to be better healthcare professionals. And I think social media can do that. By being better healthcare professionals and having more information, we hope that it translates to better patient care. That's a bit of a leap of faith, if you will. So where do we go from here? You've seen Eddie Fan use this in his talk yesterday, peak of inflated pressures, the hype curve. I actually think that in terms of social media and medical education, we're probably over the peak of inflated expectations. We're probably near the slope of enlightenment. We're thinking of how to use this smarter as a platform. How do we maximize the potential, minimize the benefit, the downside of things? And I'll close off with my favorite quote in medicine, and the way it's what motivates me. Story again, that is Rear Admiral Grace Hooper. Rear Admiral Grace Hooper was in the US Navy, but she is actually a mathematician. She developed a lot of the computer software resources for the Navy. And those are in the days where seeing a woman on a battleship was next to impossible. The great thing about her story is that she then had a battleship named after her. That's pretty cool. The most dangerous phrase in the language is, we've always done it this way. And I'll leave you with the conclusion to my talk online. Thank you.